Good morning and welcome to the Point. Over the past few weeks, we've been talking with the new leadership in the state legislature, the Speaker of the House, the Senate Majority Leader, the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, and this morning we're talking with the leader of the Democrats over in the House. Tim Greimel is a representative from Auburn Hills. We talked to him about everything from Democratic priorities to what he thinks will happen with the latest budget proposal from the governor. And we started out talking about roads and the process to get a May ballot proposal passed. In one part during our conversation, I suggested the ballot proposal was put on in May precisely to help it get passed. Listen carefully as he disagrees with that premise and talks more about how he and others will try to support that proposal, even though it wasn't the one that they had started out supporting in the first place. This morning, our conversation with the Democratic leader in the House, Representative Tim Greimel. It's a new session, and perhaps against the odds, you are the senior member on the block when it comes to leadership because you've been here for a while at least. Everybody else certainly has their experience, but you've got a new Speaker of the House, you've got a new Senate Minority and Majority Leader. Talk to me about this group of four and how you are or are not coming together, coalescing.
Well, we're certainly going to have our differences over a number of areas when it comes to policy debate. There's no question about that. And I think there are some disagreements over the budget proposal that we've just recently seen introduced. But we're really focused on trying to find common ground and finding ways that we can work together. Last term, we as House Democrats worked very closely with the governor to pass some important initiatives, including the Healthy Michigan Medicaid expansion plan, the grand bargain for the city of Detroit, this transportation compromise that emerged at the end of last year. And we're committed to continuing to find ways that we can work together with the other side of the aisle and the governor to get good things done for the state.
When you approach this from the standpoint that you're in the minority, which is obvious, both in the House and the Senate, there is an interesting potential that I want to discuss with you. But first, let's discuss the reason I think there's this interesting potential. You just mentioned the road package, the sales tax increase ballot proposal that will come up in May. Let's talk a little bit about how that came about, because as an observer, that wasn't what I was expecting, and it came together late, as things do in lame duck, and it took 12, 14, 18 hours, whatever it was, to get the thing written, passed, a little bit of bargaining back and forth. I saw the governor walk into your office, I think, in the early morning hours to suggest that maybe the House needed to move something to get a vote in the Senate. All of those things, it finally comes out. Give me your take on that. And I said this last week, I'll say it again. I understand politics is a matter of what is possible, not maybe what is your preference. But categorize this deal.
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head. Politics is the art of the possible. This is not a perfect plan by any means. It's imperfect. It's not how some of us would have preferred that we do it. I think many of us would have preferred to see the legislature act directly to fix the roads instead of kicking something to the ballot. Having said that, the Senate had passed a plan that would have dramatically increased taxes on gasoline, would have made Michigan one of the highest or perhaps the highest taxed gasoline state in the country. The House Republicans were not willing to raise revenue through a direct revenue vote that would have gotten the roads fixed. And the only thing that they ultimately would go along with that will provide the revenue to fix the roads is putting this ballot proposal on the ballot. It's not perfect. I think we as Democrats have always had some concerns about increasing the sales tax. But it's important to note that there are a number of good things that will happen if this passes in May. First and foremost, the roads will finally get fixed in the state, which is something I think all of us in Michigan understand the desperate need for. In addition, the sales tax on gasoline will no longer apply, which means that all of the taxes on fuel will go to transportation, which I know is something that many of us want to see happen. Currently, the sales tax is in addition to the transportation tax on fuel, and the sales tax portion does not go to transportation. So we're going to change that if this passes in May. And then finally, if this passes in May, we'll see investments in education. I know that there's been a lot of debate over whether the funding for education has gone up or down, but I think virtually everybody agrees that we're underfunding education. People have seen the layoffs of teachers, they've seen classroom size go up. We need to make sure that we're investing in quality classroom instruction around the state. And the other important point to note is that if this passes in May, there'll actually be tax relief for low and middle income working people in this state who need the tax relief the most.
Those things that you just laid out, the earned income tax, at least replacing part of that, some more monies for schools, for at-risk, and all of those things that are included, really are the things that got Democrats to go along with this in large measure over in the House, aren't they?
Well, absolutely. Certainly we believe very strongly that we've got to fix the roads. The concern was over the sales tax approach, and we know that the sales tax disproportionately burdens lower income folks, and we wanted, therefore, as part of this arrangement, to fully restore the earned income tax credit to where it was 4 years ago, before Republicans took control of the legislature and raised taxes on individuals and families, so that those who are low and middle income who are working, the earned income tax credit only benefits those who work, will see an actual net tax decrease if this ballot proposal passes in May.
The process, as explained by the Lieutenant Governor on the day that the budget was rolled out, sounds quite clear. Talks about taking the 6 cents per dollar off of gasoline, and because you're taking that off, and part of that money goes to schools, and part of that goes to local government, you replace that on the other end. And when he explains it in a very well-reasoned conversation, you say, oh, that makes sense. But he can't sit down with everybody in the state of Michigan who's going to vote. And it won't be just his voice or yours or the governor's or people who support this. We've already seen people lining up, some people who have some money, lining up against this. Give me your crystal ball on this, because first of all, it was designed, my words not yours, to be on the May ballot because fewer people vote, because the people who vote in May are traditionally people who vote in school elections. Schools have a vested interest in this issue. There are some lists out there that people have that know who those voters are. I mean, that gives this a better chance of passing. But with organized opposition, does this become an uphill battle?
Well, I'm not sure that's the reason to choose May. My understanding of the reason for May, and I think the reason why most of us thought May made some sense, is because we wanted to make sure that this occurred soon enough so that if it passes, we can actually go out and start fixing the roads this summer.
You could actually start drawing against that money even though it wouldn't be collected till October.
That's exactly right. And so I think that's at least the right reason to go on the May ballot, as opposed to whether school folks tend to turn out higher in May elections. I think there are very few, if any, school board elections that still take place in May. So I actually would be very surprised if there was a disproportionate amount of education folks who turned out on the May ballot. But I think everybody understands that it's urgent that we start this road repair work as soon as possible. In terms of a crystal ball, I of course none of us have a crystal ball in terms of what might happen. Certainly it's starting out in a position in terms of the polling that is challenging to see a ballot proposal passed. I would not characterize it by any means as dead on arrival. I think this might pass. I think it really comes down to who gets out in front and actually spends resources to educate the public on both sides of this. I think that's the first big question. The other question, and you brought this up, is who turns out in the May election? Is it the anti-tax crowd, or is it the fix the roads crowd? I think that's going to be a huge determinant here. And the other question too is what kind of shape will the roads be in May? I think that may influence how willing people are to actually raise the sales tax in order to fix the roads.
I don't have a crystal ball either, but I bet they're no better in May than they are right now, because after this winter and the freeze and thaw, and the governor's talked about that. He said, look, by the time May rolls around, these roads are going to be a real testament to why they need to be fixed. Okay, so now we've set up the scenario. Here is the ballot proposal. I don't want to presuppose anything, but let's suggest for a moment it doesn't pass. If it doesn't pass, none of those other things you talked about happen either. No more money for schools, no more money for at-risk, EITC doesn't go. The only thing that was kind of in that package that would happen is the Main Street fairness. That's not connected, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I don't even know if I would call that part of this package. That's not connected in any way, shape, or form in my mind.
Okay, it just kind of happened at the same time. So none of this package happens. So this goes back to my original question about being in the minority. If this doesn't happen, given what many believe will be the reticence of the current makeup of the Republican majority, do Democrats end up with more influence? In other words, if the governor wants to try to do something with roads, or if the governor wants to do any number of things, is he going to have to come more directly and deal with the minority, with Democrats, to get votes to get to 56 in the House?
Well, perhaps. Obviously, that's what occurred last year, is that Democrats were at the table because our votes were needed to try to do something to fix the roads in our state. I think the bigger concern, though, is if this doesn't pass in May, I don't know that there is a real plan B that the majority has. And keep in mind that the Republicans control the majority in the House, the majority in the Senate, and the governorship, and ideas can't even come up for a vote in the State House unless the Republican Speaker allows them to come up for a vote. So if the governor wants to get something done on roads, if the May ballot proposal fails, he'll still have to get a majority of the Republicans to go along with that idea. And all indications are that the majority Republicans in the state legislature don't have a plan B. I think most observers believe that if this fails in May, one of two things will happen. Either the road simply will not get fixed for years to come, or alternatively, that the Republicans will take all the money to fix the roads from schools and local cities and townships. And that, of course, is a plan that the House Republicans did pass out in December. Fortunately, the governor did not accept that plan and the Senate did not take it up. We should not be funding roads at the detriment of education in the state.
I don't want to spend this whole program on roads, but it's what we're going to be talking about for the next 2 months. Talk to me about the budgetary realities.
Yeah.
People say, well, it's a 50, or as proposed by the governor, $54 billion budget. Of that, about what, $10 billion is the money that the state really has to deal with when it comes to everything that we think of as state services primarily comes out of that. So it's from that pool that you would have to come up with $1.2 billion or whatever it's going to take per year. Is it possible to divert enough money out of the existing funds to fix roads, in your opinion?
I have not seen a realistic proposal from anybody to take the money out of the existing budget, other than the House Republican plan from December that takes it out of schools, which would mean that schools would lose $800 million a year in Michigan, all across the state. Cities and townships would lose another $100 million a year. And these are entities that have already been hit with very drastic cuts over the past 4 years. And as I said, in the case of schools, we've seen class sizes go up, we've seen a shortage of materials, we've seen underinvestment in technology in the classroom. We should be investing in schools, not taking money out of schools. The other concern when it comes to cities and townships is taking this money away from them means that they're going to have less funds to keep firefighters on the job and police officers on the street. That's certainly not a good direction to head down either.
The leader of the Democrats in the House had plenty to say about roads, and he has an opinion on the governor's budget proposal too, and you'll hear that when we return to the point. Welcome back to the Point. Representative Tim Greimel is the leader of the Democrats in the state House. And even though they are in the minority, Democrats, of course, have their own priorities. And he has his opinion on the governor's new budget proposal. We know that the governor has rolled out his budget. We know what his priorities are. I know you've seen it, and you may not have been able to study the entire thing. There's a lot in there. But you know what the broad brushstrokes are. What's your first blush impression of what the governor is proposing?
Yeah, I think there are some positive things in the governor's proposal, and I think there are a number of areas where we're looking forward to working with the governor, particularly when it comes to higher education. The governor has rightly focused on increasing funding and improving affordable access to skilled trades training for young people. We think that's very important to prepare those who may not be college bound to get the training and preparation they need for good paying jobs of the future. In addition, the governor wants to make sure that we're investing in universities and community colleges. That's something that we strongly support after they've been hit with cuts in recent years. I think our concern is that, especially when it comes to the governor's executive order to try to fix the current fiscal year's deficit, is that what he's proposing is to use the school aid fund as a kind of rainy day fund and take hundreds of millions of dollars out of the school aid fund to balance the general fund budget. And by the governor's own admission, the general fund budget deficit is really the result of overly generous and lavish tax credits and tax giveaways to corporate interests in this state. That's what we should be focused on cracking down on. We should not follow the governor's approach and the legislative Republicans' approach of taking money out of the school aid fund to fund these lavish tax giveaways to companies.
I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to ask everybody in this building this question before it's all over. You and I were talking before we started this program about those tax credits.
Yep.
Let's forget for a moment how they came about, when they came about, where they came about, because it was really a different time. I mean, the economy was in shambles in this state, and there were a lot of people grasping at straws trying to find a way to get Michiganders back to work. Our unemployment rate was in the double digits. People were fleeing the state.
Yep.
So it was a different time. But now here we are. The economy has improved dramatically, and there are some businesses that are taking advantage of these tax credits. And I want to be careful to point out that they are perfectly legitimate expenditures that are being made because they were given these tax credits. And there's no indication they're not using them properly. But it does put a strain on the budget. So is it your opinion that there is nothing? We already know there's a real lack of transparency. The governor has talked about it. You and I were just talking about it. Is there nothing that the governor, and working in concert with the legislature, can do to end those tax credits? Because some of those are scheduled to go on through like 2030.
Yeah, I believe that there are some things we can do. Now, I think what some have argued is that because these are essentially contracts that the state has entered into with companies, that there are some limits on how those can be modified. I think the most important thing is that we stop future contracts like this from being entered into.
Which the governor says he's done, right?
Well, he has largely done it. I think it's important to keep in mind, though, that we continue to see a lot of Michigan Economic Development Corporation special interest tax giveaways in various forms that are supposed to result in economic growth and job creation, but there's not real accountability making sure that the companies actually deliver on the job promises. That's something that we believe is an absolute must if we're going to fix this. Certainly we'd like to do that to the greatest extent possible retroactively with some of these contracts that have already been entered into, but we've absolutely got to do it moving forward. And in addition to holding companies accountable to actually create the jobs that they're supposed to be creating in exchange for these tax benefits, we've also got to require that they be transparent and open with their books and with how these tax credits are being used and what the benefits are to the state. That's something that we collectively as Michigan taxpayers, who are ultimately funding these tax benefits, should insist on as part of these agreements.
Should the state, you and the legislature and others, close the doors on that building over here in Lansing where the MEDC is and bring those folks back into a more formal government entity than this quasi-governmental agency that has access to and the right to make contracts and spend taxpayer money?
Well, I do think that we need to find a way to make these programs much more accountable to elected officials. I'm not somebody who thinks that we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think that we need to keep incentive programs that actually work and actually lead to job creation. But the way to do that is to bring greater accountability to the Michigan Economic Development Corporation or some replacement entity so that they're actually holding companies accountable to deliver on these jobs promises.
Let's talk about you as the leader of the Democrats. You have priorities that you have set. What would you like to accomplish in these next 2 years? Understanding, as you point out, you're in the minority, but I still am following through with this path that Democratic votes, whether that ballot proposal passes or not, may be more in demand as this governor tries to push his agenda forward, which could open the door for more of your agenda, potentially.
Yeah, the real urgency right now in the state is to make sure that we have an economy that's working for everyone. We've seen some positive economic growth in the state over the course of the past couple of years. That's good. I think the state in broad strokes is heading in a good direction, but we've got to make sure that everybody has a real opportunity to succeed. That means improving access to affordable education, especially beyond high school in terms of skilled trades training, in terms of community colleges and universities. That's something that we agree with the governor on, and we want to partner with him to make that a reality. And we've got to make sure that our young people have the skills and abilities to go on to a post-high school educational arena. That means, and the governor has talked about this, that we need to make sure that all third graders are reading at third grade level reading proficiency. That's, again, something we strongly agree with, and we want to partner with the governor and our colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle to make a reality. But I think that there are some other things that we've got to do if we want an economy that works for everyone. And I touched on one of them, which is we need to distinguish between those tax credits that are actually leading to job growth when we give these to businesses and those that aren't. We need to keep the tax credits going that are actually creating jobs and leading businesses to invest in our communities and create job opportunities. But we need to end those tax credits that simply are not working and that aren't delivering jobs. And then finally, we need to create an environment here in Michigan that restores some basic tax fairness. Over the course of the past 4 years, in addition to the special interest tax credit giveaways, we've seen an annual tax cut for big business in the state to the tune of $1.8 billion a year. And that was largely paid for by increasing taxes on families and seniors. And we need to provide tax relief to those who need it most. That means reducing the tax burden for individuals, families, and seniors instead of for these big corporate fat cats.
When you talk about those tax cuts, and we know that during this last election cycle we heard a lot of conversation about tax cuts for big business that was put on the back, particularly from Democrats, as you just point out, on middle America, or in this case, middle Michigan in this case. Have those tax cuts, from your perspective, resulted in part of the economic recovery we see here, and or have they resulted in enough of that to justify those tax cuts to business?
Well, and the short answer is no. We have seen some good economic growth in the state, but that started in 2011 before these tax cuts even went into effect. And the biggest reason why we've seen economic growth in this state is because of the revival of the auto industry. And that has everything to do with the federal assistance to the auto industry that got it back up on its feet, and very little to do with any of these tax benefits and giveaways. Yes, we should and have reduced the tax burden on small businesses. That's important. We all agree with that. But we've seen this government largesse in the form of tax credits and other tax giveaways thrown at big companies that frankly don't need it, are profitable without it, and have not delivered on job creation. I think we'd be better off focusing on helping small businesses succeed through microloan programs and other ways to make sure that they have access to the credit and the loans that they need to grow and create jobs.
We've got about 60 seconds left. Give me your best guess, as we are pretty early on into this new legislature. Will the makeup of the State House and the State Senate, to the degree that you're familiar, be more functional or less functional than it was over the last 2 years?
Well, it's very hard to predict, and I think that question is going to have to be answered ultimately by the Republican Speaker in the House and the Republican Senate Majority Leader in the Senate. I think the question for them is, do they want to work with Democrats and with the governor to advance a centrist, pragmatic agenda that benefits the vast majority of Michigan residents, or do they want to hunker down and cater to their right wing? If they do the first option and want to advance good policy that benefits Michiganders, we're going to be right there by their side, working with them to get good things done. But if they just try to cater to the Republican extreme right wing, that's not going to help Michiganders, there's not going to be a lot that we're interested in going along with.
And we'll be back with more To the Point in just a minute. So in the past few weeks, we've talked with all of the leadership from the House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats in the state legislature. Going forward, the next big item will be getting the budget done. And our guest next week will have a lot to say about what happens and when. Senator Dave Hildenbrand is a West Michigan lawmaker who is the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and that's where every one of those budget items will go next. He'll be our guest to talk about what he thinks of the governor's proposal and where he plans to take it. It's next Sunday morning, 10 o'clock. To the Point.